Thank you all for being here. We want to begin with introductions. Chief Harriet Sullivan, thank you so much for being here. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Good to see you in this role. So we have on our side today, I'm going to read names across my screen. And well, no, I'm not, because I'm not looking at full screen. BJ, you can do it.
Certainly. With us are President Scott, Vice President Lightfoot, if you'd like to say hello.
Good afternoon.
Councilmember,
You'll be there.
Councilmember Evans.
I'm coming right now. I'm sorry. Let me see this for some reason. Oh, there you are. We were. Hey, hello everyone. How are you?
Hey.
Blessings. Good afternoon, each and every one of you. My name is Willie Leifler, City Council Vice President, and I welcome Chief Harriet as well as Executive Chief Anderson. It's good to see you, and look forward to this conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
Next, we have Councilmember Evans.
Hello, Malik Evans, Council Member at Large.
Councilmember Gruber.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you. Nice to see you on this side of the world, Chief Harriet.
Councilmember Harris.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's good to see you. Thank you.
Councilmember Lupian.
Hey, Councilmember Lupian, from the East District.
Councilmember Melendez.
Good afternoon, Chief. Miguel Melendez, City Council Member at Large.
Councilmember Patterson.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Patterson, Northeast District. Good to see you, Chief. Pleasure to meet you, new Chief, Deputy Chief.
And Councilmember Peo. Peo.
Councilman Peo, thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and good luck with what you're up against, new Chief. It's a tough job. It's a tough job, so I respect everything you're doing. Thank you very much.
And then on the council staff side, we have myself, BJ Scanlon, Katie Hasselwander, City Clerk Hazel Washington, and Deputy Clerk Conda Brown. And I don't know, Mayor or Chief, if you'd like to introduce your side in the administration.
Thank you for the opportunity. We are excited. Everyone knows the challenges that we face in the city of Rochester, but as I announced when appointing Cynthia Harriet Sullivan, I believe that she is the person to do the job for us. She not only comes to us with a policing background, but her love for this community, her love for service, as well as the fact that she got out of policing to basically redeem and help people actually not go to jail through her work in Baltimore and across the country. Came back and worked in not-for-profit sector as well as RHA, and really has a history of making sure that systems work correctly. I am thankful that she agreed to come back and to help us as we work through reinventing our department and working together with not only with the community, with our clergy, with each and every one of you. Part of her team, of course, is now Deputy Chief Anderson. Deputy Chief Anderson comes by way from Arizona, but he went into Ferguson after the Ferguson riots, worked to repair that community, worked to bring healing to Ferguson, went back home and into his home department and finished up under contract with Ferguson. And Cynthia Harriet, Chief Harriet, believed that he was the person that she needed to really help transition and bring our department where it needs to be. I am confident that, in giving her the support that she needs for us all to transition into a community and a department that fully serves the citizens of Rochester, no matter where you're from, no matter who you love, no matter the color of your skin. And so I'm thankful to each and every one of you. And I know that she, like me, believes in redemption, believes that everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed. Everyone deserves an opportunity to really prove themselves to the community, and her work speaks volumes to that. I'm also thankful because we're trying to hear, she wants to hear from the community. This week, she's been in several meetings with members of the community. We have a survey that's out. I'm really wanting to hear from a wide spectrum of the community to see where this community wants us to go with certain aspects of policing. And I know that that is something that City Council has been concerned about as well, making sure that when decisions are being made, that the community is being heard and that they are, their voices across the spectrum are being considered. And so part of that is by doing surveys and by having these community meetings. And so I'm thankful that she's open to that feedback, to that constructive criticism, and welcome her to the team. Now I turn it over to our Chief, Harriet Sullivan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mayor. I'm excited. And I've gone through several meetings. There are others, you know, that are planned. I'm looking forward to having more conversations. And I was impressed, especially at the meeting today, where they really talked about partnering with law enforcement, and that's the only way to fix things in a sustainable way. And I was really encouraged by it, quite frankly. And so, you know, I just, Mayor, I just finished my 90-day plan. I had a few tweaks and got some help with the format. So I look forward to discussing that with you at our meeting on Monday. So, but the main, you know, goals for me is I had to hit the ground running a little bit. We had some, you know, leadership challenges. So I had to fill some vacancies, and just know that my goal here are that we want committed, competent people to fill roles, and those things trickle down to the rest of our staff. And so we will also want to set a tone that, you know, we expect people to conduct themselves in a certain way, and those are the things that get you rewarded and that allows you to go up through the ranks and get into a leadership role. So I'm certainly excited about working with everyone. Your feedback is valued. Some of you I know, so that's helpful. I get a sense of your work ethic and your beliefs. So I think we can just build upon that. So thank you, Mayor.
Deputy Chief Anderson.
Do you want to introduce? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to introduce Deputy Chief Anderson?
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure if you were going to do that. Yeah, that's fine. And also with us, we have Andre Anderson. The mayor had mentioned him. He's here from Glendale, Arizona. I'm excited about him being on board. He brings a wealth of knowledge. We complement each other. His skills in the areas of managing SWAT, homicide units, and special operations. He's going to bring a wealth of knowledge to the RPD family, and then we're going to work and build on those things together. So I'm just excited that he agreed to come. I've known him for a long time. He believes in servant leadership. I've already seen him walking around and, you know, managing by walking around and introducing himself to staff throughout the building, treats everybody with courtesy and respect. I love that. Not just that he does it, but he sets a good example for everybody else. So, Andre, do you want to talk to the group and kind of introduce yourself, maybe give them a little bit more background?
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you, Chief, for the opportunity. Council members, Mayor, I appreciate the chance to be here. I'm very much aware that this is a very vibrant and passionate community, and I want you to know that I am here to assist and to help. As the Chief said, I've been in law enforcement for 29 years, and I've served in every major division of the law enforcement career path history. I spent the last part of my career as a special operations division over in the Glendale Police Department, where I was over special weapons and tactics, SWAT, and those individuals that work with the NFL Arizona Cardinals. But I believe you probably have information with respect to my resume. So without going over that, I just want you to know, because I'm sure there'll be other questions, I'm committed to this organization. I'm committed to the community. I am here to serve, and I am here to listen to the community as we embrace community policing. I am a very staunch supporter of Chief Harriet Sullivan. I know that she cares about this community. I would not be here if she had not asked, and I did not believe that she was the right fit for this organization. So I'm here to serve you, as well as the officers, as well as city government. And I see a need for us to all work collaboratively. And I'm going to put in the work in order to accomplish matters.
Thank you. I'm sure that we have, since we're not doing a confirmation, I'm sure that we have a number of questions, and I want to make sure that everybody gets theirs in. So I'll start. Councilmember Pio.
Sorry, I missed the mute button there. No, I'm good. I appreciate the time. And again, you guys got a heavy burden to carry. I just want to make sure that, all communities' inputs are heard in the city of Rochester. The Northwest is a big supporter of our police, of RPD. We love the presence in our neighborhoods. We want increased presence. So that's my little shout out for the Northwest, being a city council member for there and the only one living there. So we appreciate y'all and keep doing the good work that you do.
Thank you. Councilmember Melendez.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting with Chief Harriet last week, and we talked about a number of things. So I'm very excited to work together and try to find solutions to move forward. One of the concerns that beyond community policing and making sure that we have presence in communities is also how do we find more and better ways to continually engage outside of the problems, right? I know law enforcement officers often see the worst and the most difficult challenges in our community. So I would love to continue to work on finding more and more ways to engage, to look at recruitment, to look at other factors that will help us diversify the police force, as well as how we can find more ways for people to live in our community. So one question, though, is specific to the crisis intervention piece. And I'm wondering if you could share maybe how much of that transition has already happened and if there's anything that we can do to support any of the transition.
Thank you, Councilmember Melendez. Yeah, I did speak yesterday with part of my staff, and they were giving me some feedback as to where we are in the process. We are literally still in transition, and I can't tell you exactly where we are in the process, but I do know that that's in progress now and ongoing, and then we're just transitioning as far as administration, space, paperwork, those sorts of things. I can give you more detail on that and get specifics as to where we are today, but I do know that's ongoing. I did get some feedback on that just yesterday, so.
Councilmember Gruber.
Yes, sorry, I'm not as good as Zoom as I'd like to be at this point. So Chief and is it Deputy Chief or is it Executive? What's the proper way to refer here?
His title is Executive Deputy Chief.
Okay, so Chief Harriet and Executive Deputy Chief Anderson. I know there's a lot on your plate right now, but I would like to. There's two things in particular that are top of my mind. This is leaving all of the specifics of the Daniel Prude case on the side. I'm not necessarily going to bring that up at this moment because I don't think that would be appropriate, especially on, on Chief Anderson's first day on the job. But there are two things I'm just kind of curious about philosophically, and the first is in relation to the protests that we've had, and I'm sure that that obviously, Chief Harriet, you've been here during the duration of the protests of the last 6 weeks, and I'm sure Deputy Chief Anderson, I'm sure you're very familiar, especially with your time at Ferguson, of kind of what's going on with the general protests right now in the community. And one of the great disappointments that I felt about RPD in the last month was related to how the protests were addressed. And on top of that, the responses that we were getting in relation, that council was getting in relation to those protests. So I'm wondering right now, just kind of generally, and in terms of your philosophy on how to handle and how to address protests, which I believe there's one going on right now as we speak. And I think we all know that there's going to be some continued protests moving forward. Just want a sense of the philosophy there.
Well, I'll weigh in, and then I'd ask my EDC to weigh in as well on that, because he does have some extensive experience on that. I do want to mention that I literally worked up until the last minute, and then on the next day came to work for RPD. So I've only been literally on the job since October 14th. Before that, I was, I had quite a bit of work to do to just kind of catch things up. So, folks who were taking over from me had all the information they needed over at the Housing Authority. But philosophy-wise, we do have that program or process that's called a mobile field force. I know they get a certain level of training that is supposed to help them in dealing with crowds. I've seen a little bit of video from some of the past protests, and I do agree that certainly we want our best response from our officers, to handle the situation in as a professional manner as possible, but to also, some of the video I've seen, clearly there are some incidences where the staff or police personnel have had live fireworks thrown at them and, other items. So I've got to work on this to try to strike a balance. I want to have a conversation with some of the people that are involved in the protests, part of the organizers, to see if we can really come to an agreement about, how we can best manage those circumstances. But EDC, do you want to weigh in as well?
Caught me just as I was getting water, Chief. Yeah, so I agree with Chief, and certainly philosophically, I know that we've had some conversations, and obviously it's very important for us to protect the constitutional rights of everybody involved. And sometimes I think, as we understand that the community members certainly have constitutional rights that we need to protect, we also need to protect and keep the officers safe as well. And the officers have an obligation to keep the community safe. And so, what I plan to do with the chief is open up a network of individual leaders throughout the country that'll talk to us about how we can prepare and plan for the future with respect to any potential protest. But at the same time, the response is really simple for us, I think, is we want to be respectful, we want to be constitutional, and we want to make sure that we do everything we can to safeguard the citizens and the businesses. And that's a tall challenge. But I believe that if we work together with the community, there are things that we can do together, but it's going to require us to put a lot of work in. And but philosophically, it's about protecting each and every individual's constitutional rights and making sure the city is safe as possible.
President Scott, I know I saw in the chat other people chimed in. I do have a second issue I wanted to bring up, which I'm happy to do later, but just a follow up to that, Chief and Executive Deputy Chief. you know, I think one of the things that really struck me over the month of September was how little consistency there was in terms of the response. There were times where the LRAD came out. There were times where it was pepper bullets. There was times where it was nothing. There was times where pepper bullets were at the ground, and there were flashbangs. There were times where pepper bullets were at people's chest. And it was very difficult to try to get a sense of, I mean, I even asked the question verbatim, kind of where is the line for RPD that would trigger a response that involved pepper bullets. And I really could not get a clear sense of that and a clear sense of consistency. So I think that to me is the biggest ask, is to try to understand. And Chief Harriet, huge respect that the first thing you said was you wanted to talk to the organizers and get on the same page there. And I'm sure that with that philosophy, you'll get to the bottom of it. But I just really ask for consistency, and that we as council members can also understand what that kind of line in the sand is, because that clarity is really important.
Understood, and we'll keep you posted as we move through this process and these discussions. I will share with you, though, that, you know, it's not necessarily the organizers, but some of the protesters are friends of mine. And I have full confidence in that they would exercise their right to protest and would not, you know, conduct themselves in a way as to try to hurt anybody. I'm confident about that. And I've tried using that relationship to help kind of facilitate some discussions and conversations. Like there was one protest that had the ability to maybe kind of escalate, but those people called me, you know, on my cell phone, you know, after hours, and we were able to try to, you know, kind of facilitate some things that, you know, meant that one ended and it didn't escalate. So I'm looking for us to kind of keep that dialogue piece open so we can kind of operate on that with that understanding, and we'll see where it goes. But certainly, definitely open to talking and discussing and explaining where helpful, you know, how the process works, what's appropriate. And so people have an understanding of, like you said, Councilman, that you know, here's where the line is, and if this sort of activity took place, then maybe we need to question that. So, but definitely open to that.
Well, there clearly is a body of conversation and work that's going to be need to happen in this field, and we as a council have also been looking at some possibly legislative actions that we'd like to see, but we definitely want to talk with you and your new EDC, and we will have that conversation with the mayor, and we'll get back together, because this is a topic that we've struggled with over the last several weeks, and we're going to need to struggle with this some more, because I have great confidence in you all about this, but I'm not totally encouraged, just because there's a lot of work that's going to need to happen between now and us getting a better feel for this. So just know that it is of extreme concern to us, and that we're looking forward to helping to work through it.
Right. An important point I want to make is that while I have seen some things, you know, that, you know, are concern me, I don't condemn the goal or the intent of that group. I mean, people want to see fair treatment, and we're all for that. But I don't paint everybody with the same brush. Sure, some things that were done that are inappropriate, but I don't let that take away from the goal, what their intention is. And, you know, sometimes people are going to hold those kinds of protests hostage for their own agenda, but certainly, like I said, some of the folks I know that are good people, fair, and that hasn't changed as far as I'm concerned. And I think we have to just try to start with that and try to move forward together.
I know there are a couple questions, but I want to get through each of the members and we can come back to your questions if it hasn't been answered by then. So Councilmember Lupien.
Good afternoon, Chief. It's good to meet you. I know we were emailing a little bit in the RHA capacity, but glad to have you here. To kind of follow up on Councilmember Gruber's concerns, I had heard that in the 21st century policing recommendations that there's some guidance there around mass gatherings, and that some of the recommendations involve like selective extraction if there's some people in the crowd that look to be interested in escalating and causing harm, to kind of pull those out instead of kind of opening fire on the whole crowd, as well as taking a less defensive stance and being more conversational with the crowd. And I just wanted to gauge your thoughts on those kind of that kind of way of interacting with mass gatherings.
Sure. I'm going to say, first of all, that within the plan I've prepared, one of the points is to assess RPD's, the Rochester Police Department's alignment with 21st century policing and those 6 pillars. So to me, that's a standard that we have to consistently keep evaluating to make sure, you know, our actions are aligning with that. So certainly that's something we want to do. But I also want to invite my EDC. He's, you know, I'm really impressed with a lot of the work he's done, especially in Ferguson. So you want to speak to that a little bit for the councilwoman?
Absolutely, Chief. And we're talking about how we engage the members of the crowd with respect to trying to assess who might be involved in this situation and who may not. And so there really isn't a cookie cutter response to that, council member. I'm very familiar with our recommendations for 21st century policing, and they are sound recommendations. But here's the reality when we talk about that. Sometimes when you have an individual that is inside of a crowd emerged and they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing, which is really the minority. I mean, most people are there because they believe that they should be there. And in fact, I know that there's many people that we have to respect their rights. There's a historical concern there. But in order to extract the person, it becomes difficult at times to get police officers in that crowd to extract that person without it really creating a number of problems for everyone else around them. Now, there are tactics that we'll be able to utilize to help assist with that. But quite frankly, Councilmember, to be honest, those are things that we probably won't be able to discuss right now because they're things that we just can't put out. But the bottom line is the goal is to extract people that may be causing harm in a safe manner. And we have to do that situationally. And that takes a lot of tactics and strategies. And many of those things we're going to train on and find ways in order to accomplish that. But indiscriminately causing problems for everyone is what I think you're talking about. And those are things we want to get away from because that's not good for anyone.
And I think too, thank you for that answer. I think too, you know, there hasn't been in the past, as well, especially, you know, on those nights where there was a really severe response. I've seen efforts of the crowd themselves in making sure that those people are kind of sent on their way or, you know, addressed internally. And sometimes the response from the police has been to, when they open fire, they don't give the crowd that chance. Because I think, you know, that from what I've seen, there's no desire to cause harm. You know, and in fact, the one night, surprisingly, that the protests arrived at the police, the public safety building, and there was no one out front. You know, instead of, you know, I think what the expectation would have been was for the crowd to cause harm. They just sat down and had a teach-in and went home early. You know, so I think that I'd be interested to see how we could maybe adjust our response. And then the second thing I want to bring up is just with the state police here, I've been kind of hearing that maybe they're a little bit more jumpy than our officers. They don't really understand our culture, and that maybe that they're a little bit burned out, and that, you know, the longer they're here, it could be could lead to some situations. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on continuing to receive that mutual aid from the state.
Thank you. Some great question. I'm going to look into that. I want to and get back to you. I do want to have a sense of feedback internally, and I also want to reach out to the state police. I did get a call from their regional director, and so I'm going to. The plan was to call him back to set up a meeting anyway. So I think we can have a discussion about that to kind of get a sense of how things are going and to see if he sees any concerns or issues. But I would like to certainly look into that and then get back to you with a response.
Thank you.
Well, just a little more on that. Beyond in terms with the state, you know, I'm sure you've heard, I got a real thing about the dogs. And that was one of my hot points, but it wasn't just mine. You know, it symbolizes some really serious concerns for me, for us as a people. And the tank, you know, the military tank, look, and it's not, I guess it's not even a tank, it's a Bearcat, but it looks like a tank. But my point is, the mutual aid brings with it certain things, and apparently they say this is how we roll. And I would hope that the conversation would be one that would include some negotiating on that we appreciate your help, but there, you know, we've got some baseline kinds of issues. So if you just make sure you keep that in the pot, I'd appreciate that.
Definitely, Madam President. Thank you. I sure will.
Hey, Chief, do you mind if I add to that?
Please do.
Councilmember, that was one of the first things that I also started taking a look at when I got here. I started taking a look at the structure in terms of how we go about utilizing what's called incident command and a unified command, which we're working with other individuals. I know those are technical terms. And I too, as talking to the chief, are very concerned about the utilization of the dogs. I was over the K9 unit, and let's be honest, despite of that, the historical perspective with respect to my parents, my grandparents is an issue. So we're already taking a look at that. We're talking about how we can work with the state, with our state partners in order to make sure that we have a platform that allows for us to be working in cohesion. And I know the chief allowed me to partake in that with the experience I have. We'll be putting a plan to mitigate things of that nature.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, we definitely got the optics on that and understood right away. So yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Councilmember Patterson.
I have no questions.
Oh, that's always scary.
Yep, it is.
Okay. Councilmember Harris. That mute button, I think the mute button moves around on your screen, right? It's never where you left it the last time. Councilmember Harris.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to say welcome to Deputy Chief Anderson and looking forward to working with you and Chief Harriet. I have a question about where do you guys stand with the neighborhood policing model? I know your predecessors have worked extensively on, you know, setting up a platform for that and trying to move our community forward with addressing that. What is your plan for that model going forward?
Thank you for the question and thank you for the card. That was very thoughtful of you. I certainly believe strongly in that. I served as a crime prevention officer for some years, not because of the perks, but it was something I loved doing. Love working with the community. It was a good fit for me. The EDC and I are on the same page. We know that if we're not partnering and working together, nothing's going to change, or at least nothing's sustainable. So we look forward to that, believe strongly in that model. I've believed in that for years. And our question is, who can we bring to the table? How many partners can we gather and then still work efficiently? Not if, but how many and when. But Andre, you want to add to that, please?
Yes, that is a fantastic question. And I know the chief and I talked about crime control strategies and community engagement strategies. I'm very familiar with the neighborhood policing model. I know that New York City Police Department is utilizing it on a regular basis. And I've done some studies and I understand it completely. In fact, when I started taking a look at the different types of models that we may employ here, as I talk to the chief, and there'll be a myriad of different models because it won't be one. The neighborhood policing models seem to be one that would fit this organization. But again, before we do anything, before we put things in place, the last thing that I want to do with the chief is for the police department to come up with a model without including the community members and council and managers. So you all need to be part of what we decide. We'll be bringing information to you. We'll get a model together, but it needs to be cultivated for Rochester because what's working in New York City might not be best for Rochester. So we need a tailored plan for this city, but neighborhood policing is part of the platform.
Council Vice President Lightfoot.
Thank you, Madam President, to the chief and to the executive deputy chief. I don't know if I necessarily have questions. I just have some comments and some ask of you, both of you in your leadership. Two things. One, extensive, and I emphasize the word extensive, community engagement. I think that the survey was a good step and a tool. And I think there's many tools that you have and that we have as a city in our toolbox to cultivate extensive community engagement. So I would, my ask and one of my concerns and pet peeves or things that I'm always looking for is constant community engagement. So I mean, engaging the protesters, engaging the individuals that may be on the opposite side of thought process and engaging them very early on, very immediately, like now, like yesterday, having these conversations with these individuals, I think is just important in legitimizing trust, bringing that unity and being able to get people to, buy into whatever community plans that may be coming in the very future. And I agree with Executive Deputy Chief Anderson that it's imperative that the community be engaged and council be engaged in the beginning. And when I speak of council and communication, I'm not just speaking of the community, but I'm also speaking extensive community engagement. But then part two is communication. When in some of the incidents that we've had in the past, what the breakdown was communication. There was breakdown in communication. And so we have to look at how we communicate. And I'm speaking specifically, there's the community engagement, how we engage with the community, but then there's the internal piece of communication and communication with the council. Myself as chair of public safety, our council members, we have to make sure that we have a very clear understanding of what communication looks like between both your office and our legislative body. That's very important, and that has to be clear from the very beginning, and I'll give you some examples. As far as even when it comes to who's being notified during certain incidences, during certain situations, who gets notified. That needs to be clear. That needs to be a policy. That needs to be, there doesn't need to be thinking about, oh, I think I should call this person, or I think I should. No, that needs to be very clear on who's notified and for what incidences they're notified for. Use of forces, people dying in the, under the custody of those stuff, and I know some of this stuff is going to be flushed out with the race commission. I know some of this stuff is going to be flushed out potentially with the working groups that are working alongside with the mayor and yourself and others. But these are some things, in my opinion, that are low-hanging fruit that need to happen like yesterday. They can't wait 3 or 4 months, because an incident can happen tomorrow. An incident can happen tonight. And if these things aren't addressed and haven't been addressed and are just waiting for someone else to address them, then to me, that's opportunity for more civil unrest because of the lack of communication or the misunderstanding and the unclarity of communication and what that looks like. Also, I'll give you an example of, for instance, when we have constituent situations, how does that look? You know, in the past, you know, there was opportunities where I would contact Lieutenant Shaw with certain incidents. I would send everything through him for myself personally and get answers concerning things from, you know, a police officer didn't respond when I called, or, you know, a police officer spoke to me wrong or something. You know what I mean? I would send a lot of those constituent situations through Lieutenant Shaw. So, I mean, with the new administration, I think it's important and imperative that we understand and we have a clear understanding of how we communicate with your office and with what issues. There's our personal questions that we may have, that of course anybody can email anybody with anything, of course. And then but you know, you guys are very busy, gonna have a lot on your plate over the next few months. So I think it's important that we get a full, clear understanding of how we communicate with your office around constituent, identifying whether, you know, you do this for constituent situations. If it's a personal thing, of course, that's different. Or if there's action, and when and with, how do you communicate and what do you communicate for policies around incidences that may be controversial? You know, making sure that, you know, the president and myself are briefed, that council are briefed, and that we're all giving the same information and the same opportunity to view evidence, whether it be body worn cameras or whatever. But it's very important, and so it doesn't get confusing, and we don't have to keep saying, oh, we should do it this way, or this is the protocol. It needs to be from your office, from what you want, from how you're operating. We need to know what the communication looks like, what the expectations are, what, you know, how do we fit in all of that, so that we have very clear understanding of how we get our information, who we're dealing with and talking to, and so council members can be on the same page when we're connecting and dealing with your office. So those are the two things I had: extensive community engagement and communication with, you know, both more specifically internally.
I just want to jump in there for a quick second, Vice President Leifler. I'm glad you raised this, but because we just are working with the law department to finalize a form, and that's not just for the police department, but for every department across the board of and policy around notifying not only myself, the deputy mayor, but the city council president in writing with a form of any incident that, you know, of certain incidents that may happen. And so we are going through that policy right now. As you know, there's other departments that we have in our purview that certain incidences happen, and we want to make sure that council is informed of that as well. And so as soon as we finalize that policy and get it, you know, written, and also the form, we'll make sure that that is shared with you all. But it is definitely something that we're doing across the board. We want uniformity to it, so that it's not, you know, one person doing it this way, another person doing it that way. We want some uniformity to it. And so we're in the process of finalizing that now, and that should be to you within the next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Evans.
Yeah, just briefly, just to the chief and deputy chief, one of my concerns is, and I know it's a concern of a lot of folks, is just an approach as it relates to guns and gun crimes. I mean, we've had numerous shootings this year. Thankfully, a lot of them did not result in death, but they could have. And I'm sure most of them, just like many places across the country, were done with illegal guns. So I don't know, and you don't have to answer this now, but as you settle in and start working on your plans, what a comprehensive approach to dealing with guns are. I mean, I always tell people there's no gun shops in the city of Rochester, there's no gun manufacturers in the city of Rochester, but we are constantly inundated with guns. I mean, it's just you don't want to throw your hands up, but it's a major, major problem. And all the other stuff that was talked about was important, obviously, but this has been an issue just for years, and it's a national issue. We know the gun lobby; they have a lot of power, but I mean, it's an issue, and I don't know what it is. Is it buybacks? Is it who knows? But a lot of this, I think, goes beyond. We know it's social issues. We know it's a lot of that stuff, but a lot of this stuff, as it relates to guns, have me just extremely, extremely concerned. And I'm sure a lot of people may not know this, but if you wanted to right now be a legal gun owner right now, there's a backlog on ammunition, and there's a backlog to get a regular gun right now. So we know that there are tons of guns out there in the community. So I don't know what the what can be done about it. I know I don't have all the answers, but we're seeing the results of guns, and they're just not here in Rochester, but across the country. So I think we need some comprehensive approach that goes just beyond Rochester to get our arms around this serious issue.
Thank you for the question. We just met this past Monday, and then there was a follow-up discussion on Wednesday to look at this spike in shooting crimes, because we know that as we've been monitoring these sorts of incidences, and we want to take that as an opportunity to see what some of the causes may be, and do we in fact have some indicators that will help us come up with a strategy to deal with them. So I've met with our crime analysis staff, and they did share with me the statistical information and data on the shootings, and that there's, that spike exists or increase exists, like you mentioned. But what I've asked for, and I expect to get shortly, is an idea on why. Like when we report these sorts of incidences, generally we may have some feedback about why it may have occurred or what the causes are. Are they due to conflict, ongoing or new? And so I want to be able to get some of that information, and it's going to help us internally with our strategy on this. But I can't help but notice also, without I'm not saying I have a scientific basis for this, but just years of looking at incidences and seeing trend changes. And we know something that is pretty common here, or that is in common with this timing, is what we're dealing with the COVID crisis. So I'm not sure how there's a connection, but I know that that's something that sticks out there. And so I'll be interested in having more answers about why that is and what sort of strategies we can come up with to try to impact that. But we're going to have a follow-up discussion on this next week, so we can tighten up our responses and see what ways we can change how we do things to come up with better solutions so that we have more of an impact on this. So we'll keep you posted on it, though. Yeah.
Thanks. And I would just say, sadly, we're not alone. So it'd be interesting to see what other municipalities are doing in that area as well. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I just want to just piggyback off of what the chief was saying, and also Councilmember Evans. Crime hasn't stopped. If we look at the numbers across the country and here in the city of Rochester, we are seeing some major numbers, 20-year highs on some things. That is, related to a number of things, the social unrest, the coronavirus, we still have citizens that are located in every part of our community that are looking for support, looking for help, looking for response. And we have to have a functioning police department in order to be able to respond effectively and efficiently to those people. We are seeing some of the results of everything that's boiled over happening right now. And there are many victims here that are looking for a response and that are suffering. When we look at, right now, our shootings are up, I believe, 96%. That's not just in Rochester, that's across the country, right? So those are numbers that we're not talking about. Those numbers that we should be talking about, because when we look at what is our community response, that's not the discussion that we're having. And we need to have that discussion, because the citizens of Rochester, the 208,000 citizens of Rochester, they're looking for an answer to that type of situation that's happening. When you look at, even robberies or burglaries, rape, certain things, and you're looking at these numbers, those are the things that, we're concentrating on and looking at now. And we're going to be coming to council in the next couple of weeks, because we just had a meeting on this on Tuesday. It's something that I've, shared with the chair, that our numbers, this year, for various number of reasons, are in line with other cities. But it's something that we need to start paying attention to, and we have to start responding to. And we need a functioning police department to be able to do that. And so I'm thankful that we now have the interim chief, the executive chief, and that's going to start to really put those pieces together, because we have to be able to do everything and make sure that the citizens of Rochester that are being victimized are understanding that we're still here and we're still responding to those calls and we're still responding to those issues. And so we're looking at, response times. We're looking at, we have a certain number of officers that are on duty at a certain time. I know the issue came up with mutual aid and things like that. And so there's a number of different factors that go into any given day of policing that we have to be aware of. But the most important part of this is the citizens of Rochester that throughout this, and many of them are suffering for various reasons, and they need for us to be able to respond to that call. And the numbers right now are in a situation where our police department has to get back to doing the police work and getting these shooters off the streets, getting the weapons off the street, looking at the gang violence and being able to deal with the gang violence and the retaliation and all of that that's going back and forth, and working with Pathways to Peace. And we had a meeting with them earlier this week, working with them. But when council sees these numbers, this is the reason why we know that there are some things that we need to change, but we also know that we need to get back to doing the work, because we also have citizens that are being affected daily by the changes that or the lack thereof, or the things that we're responding to and not necessarily talking about right now.
That's sobering, to say the least. It's very sobering, because I think that we all, during recent weeks and months, have sort of gotten this timber of, it's almost like this undertone of lawlessness, although we may not be directly affected. You feel it, you sense it, you read the headlines, you hear the scanner. So it is very sobering to hear those numbers. How we talked about engagement and community engagement and communication and all of that. How are the officers? Chief, you're not new to them. Maybe some of them are to you, but what is your method of determining where they are, both mentally and psychologically and all that stuff?
Well, I can share with you first that a lesson I learned early in my career is that you have to monitor your people. You know who's on your shift, your platoon, who you're overseeing. And by that, I mean, you know, we talk about the line supervisors who have the biggest, most direct contact. If you know that, for example, in this current environment, if they've been working daily on overtime at times too as well, without a break, that after a while people get tired and it impacts their ability to function at a high level. So we want to be cognizant of that and try to ensure that where we can, we provide some relief to folks that they need to take a break. The other thing I look at is we talk about, you know, the current crime trends, but what I have to look at globally or big picture wise is, you know, how much staffing do I have, and on any given day, where are they being assigned? I can share just my preliminary view on this, that a lot of the protests are unplanned, and oftentimes the department's notified about them, given short notice. That drains from our staffing. They have to get pulled away or brought in on overtime. And so that is going to have a direct impact on how we service other members of the community who may need our help in different ways. So it's a juggling act, I can tell you, on those sorts of things. But I also think that, you know, officer wellness is one of those 6 pillars, and we understand why, because a whole by whole, I mean, you know, obviously balanced, well-rested officer is going to be your best bet for better service to the community. So we know that there's a connection there, and that's certainly something that I would consider a priority. But I can't underestimate or underemphasize that my knowledge based on the line supervisors, a critical role in overseeing their people and making sure that, you know, when you start to see, you know, people have been working for long hours, that it's time to come up with a strategy so that we find ways to give them some relief. EDC, do you want to weigh in on it at all? I know this is something that you and I have discussed as well.
You know, Chief, I think you hit on really the topics that I've heard. Part of the things that I would add is that while I've been here, you know, I've told the employees that I want to take an inside-outside approach. There are people that I've talked to in the community that are they're not happy, and I've talked to employees throughout the organization. Quite frankly, they're not happy. And you know, when you have protests, you can expect that employees won't be happy. That's reality. And so officer wellness is important. Yet at the same time, I think it's our job to make sure that we get out to the employees, everybody, including, I believe, quite frankly, even those that are on this call, to demonstrate we care about the employees. And I know you do. And so that's something that we're talking to the employees about. And so as we move forward, we'll just be working on carving out a plan to make sure that that we care about them. But they have a job to do. And their job requires them to be out in the community. It's a tough job. And so, you know, it's going to take some time, but I'm committed to it. And I know you're committed to it. But yeah, officer wellness is a challenge right now. But we'll get through it.
Councilmember Patterson.
All right, so I believe you've already answered my question, but I'm going to just ask it and see where we go. Is it your position, and this is for anyone in the administration who chooses to answer the question, is it your position that the last 2 months of protest have had an impact on the basic ability of the Rochester Police Department to effectively police and meet its regular core functions in the city of Rochester?
So since they weren't there, I won't say that it's a matter of effectively policing. What I think that is, it's about resources and utilizing those resources and being able to respond or dedicate a lot of time to solving things that, rather they're shootings, rather they're murders, burglaries, or to deal with some of that proactive policing that was done in the past. When we look at, and I think that the chief said it, when you look at how, last summer and in previous years, we were able to do a lot of proactive work on being in certain neighborhoods, being on the street, our Pathways to Peace team, partnering with our clergy. All of those proactive strategies bore something because we saw that our numbers, started to go down. Building those relationships was very, very important. And you were able to know, okay, during these times, we have hotspots and we have people that are ready to respond to those hotspots. And we're able to do, we're able to send over Pathways to Peace at certain times and the police department at certain times, and you were able to coordinate a lot better. When the pandemic is an issue because some of those proactive things that was done in the past, like, proactive walking and engaging and doing those relationship building, we can't do those, or we haven't been able to do those. And so you see the effects of that in the summer. You also see the effects of, when you look at the numbers, where the spike was. So when you look at the number of shootings, when the numbers of shootings happen, when burglaries happen, when you have the spike, you can look at those numbers and say, okay, this is the time frame when you talk about June, July, August, September, which is usually our higher months, but this year it is off the charts high, right? And you say, okay, what were the things that were going on during that time? When the executive deputy chiefs talks about, and this is something that I talked to the former intern chief about, is that when there's, and let's just take it for example, a protest going on, and then we have a mass shooting, right? You only have a certain number of officers that are on, and so, but you still have other 911 calls that are coming in, right? And so you have mutual aid. So you have people that, from the sheriff's department, the state police, that's helping with one of those three incidences that's happening, right? So somebody has to respond to 911 calls. Someone has to be investigating the shooting, and somebody has to be dealing with the protest. And so you have all three going on at the same time. And so that drains resources, but also it has an effect on the officers and the officers' well-being, because now I was supposed to go home at 5 o'clock. Now I'm being held over to 11 o'clock, or I'm coming in and I'm dealing with this situation. I'm going right over to this particular call or this protest, and it has many of them haven't had time off. They haven't been on vacation. They haven't, been able to recharge as anybody else. At the end of the day, we're talking about people being human. I remember being in a meeting recently, and talking to somebody, and talking to a person, and I was talking about a situation that happened with me and my daughter, and with the protest at my home. And I said, at the end of the day, I'm human, she's human, right? And so you have this 10-year-old child that, because her mom is the mayor, is dealing with this situation and traumatized by it, right? And literally traumatized by it. So you're not just dealing with a situation where people, the same as anybody else would feel, our officers feel. If you were overloaded and overworked, and you're constantly at 100, there comes a time where you may, something that wouldn't necessarily set you off will set you off. And so we have to be very, very clear about that. We have to recognize that. but we also want to make sure that we're guarding and making sure that the citizens of our community are still safe. And so it is a balancing act, but when you look at the numbers and you see what's going on, we have to talk about everything in a clear picture. We have been talking about things in a vacuum, in a silo, as if this is the only thing that's happening. And what I want council to understand is that there is 100 things happening at the same time with our police department. And we have to consider all 100 things when we're making a decision about how to move forward collectively, because we have 208,000 residents that's depending on our police department, that's dependent on me, that's dependent on council, and for us to do it collectively together in the best way for everybody to be able to move forward collectively in response to the things that we need to change, that we know we need to change, and how we need to make those changes going forward is going to be very, very important.
So is it your position then that the response to the protest has had a negative impact on our ability to do all of the other things that the police department needs to do?
I'm not saying that, like I said, you can't look at one thing in one silo. There are multiple different factors happening at one time. All of it plays into what we're seeing. And at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that we also need to be looking at the numbers across the board, as in our crime stats and our crime numbers, and considering those things, and considering officer wellness, considering people's constitutional right to protest, considering all of those things as we move forward as a city and as a department. So I'm, to answer your question in a nutshell, one particular factor cannot point to just that as being the key. It is a number of different issues, the coronavirus that's happening at the same time, that is causing this to be a year that is like no other, not just in Rochester, but across the country. But we need to consider that all of those different factors have to be considered as we move forward, and not just looking at things in silos as if that's the only thing that's happening.
Okay, so I imagine there has been a significant increase in the use of overtime between, say, June and now. If we were graphing that overtime usage and we were just taking it in month-long blocks, would the increase in overtime be seen more in September and October, or more in the summer?
Now?
No, I was just going to offer that, I believe, I'm not sure, this is my first discussion, that there's definitely been a spike in overtime. And then when we move from the last quarter into this one now, you'll see a much higher peak on that. And is it Ms. Hasselwander? During that meeting we had with Councilman Melendez, we had talked about that a little bit. So yeah, there's, you see an increase. Please don't quote me on the number, but no,
please, not a number, but just if we were looking at it month by month as blocks.
Yeah.
Year over year, we're significantly up year over year.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You always see your overtime numbers go up in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
Several reasons. You have special events that you're doing, you have special detail that you're doing. Most of the crime happens in the summertime. And so, but when you look at the number, and you have to look at the number, you would see year over year, that is a significant increase this year as compared to others. And that's why I'm saying that you cannot just look at one thing, because it is a multitude number of different things that are happening this year that's leading to what we're seeing. And time is significantly up this year in these last couple months.
Okay, so So, but for the last couple of months, are we seeing a significant increase in, so from June, July, August, September, October, if we're looking at them as each month, and I understand October ain't over yet, but I would imagine that if we're holding this year and not looking at other years and looking at that trend, is the overtime greater in September as opposed to August, as opposed to June and July? I'm just trying to clarify the question. I guess I'm not being clear.
I don't want to give you an answer without having the numbers in front of me.
That's fair. That's fair.
So let me get you that answer.
Okay.
I believe that you would see that August, September probably were our highest months.
Okay. Thank you.
But I'll get you the numbers.
And I just wanted to mention that we actually use a coding system so that we know, overtime usage for what purpose. So we would be able to look at it and break it down by those numbers.
Councilmember Lupien.
Yes. So, from my perspective, it's not surprising that crime is off the charts because we've never had a pandemic and we've never had such sustained unemployment. And, the research really shows a direct connection between unemployment and violent crime. And so when we talk about needing to address this crisis, we talk about thinking about it in silos. I think we really have to hone in on the root of crime, which is really when people don't have the resources that they need in order to survive. And, the protests do take a lot of police resources, but do they have to? So we're pulling on some nights hundreds of police officers to respond when, I think the subsequent protests have really shown not to be violent. So wondering if we could draw down the response that because I don't think the protests are going to go away anytime soon, and I think
Right.
I support the use of free speech, but I just want to say that, thinking about how we're using our resources. Additionally, we're talking about shifting roles away from the police, so talking about non-police response for mental health. So when we think about how we need to utilize our police, it's definitely part of the conversation.
Right. And so, council member, and I can let the chief talk. The situation is that you have to be prepared for anything, right? As you know, that most of the protests have been nonviolent and have been, really tamed down. However, we've seen protests where, not the organizers, but, back in, I believe it was June, where we had 186 businesses that were hit. We saw protests in the summertime where people were eating at restaurants and tables were flipped over. We've seen protests where cars have been surrounded. And so, because you prepare for the worst, but you hope for the best. And so if something was supposed to, you don't know, and I'm sure that, given the organizers and things like that, that their preference has always been to have a peaceful protest. Everybody go home safely. We exercise our constitutional right, but there has been times when that hasn't happened, and you have to be prepared. And so I think that, that's what we're looking at across the board. And that relationship that the chief was talking about is very important, to be able to have those relationships, have those conversations with the organizers to say, hey, what's going on here? Or can we, come to some understanding? I think that that's going to be very, very important going forward, because we know, it's everyone's constitutional right to protest, to go out and express themselves when they don't like something. But as a city, we have to be prepared for whatever happens, because there has been these instances across the board where, something happens and we have to be able to respond to it. So, you're getting, when the situation happened on East Avenue, or just even with, LP Loan, or, in the neighborhoods, those neighborhoods want us to be able to respond. And you have to have the manpower, you have to have the team on staff to be able to respond to them.
I totally understand that sentiment. I think also in the 21st century policing recommendations, it talks about when the protests are specifically against the police, that there needs to be a much more tactful response, and that includes a lesser response, because sometimes, and from my experience in the times that, not talking about May 30th, but in the times that the protests have gotten really tense and violent, that it almost is the police response that provokes it from the crowd. They're looking for a fight and they get it. And so I'd like to see explored what it would look like to really de-escalate and bring and draw down the number of people responding. And also the incidents that you mentioned, weren't prevented, even though we were quote unquote we were prepared. So it's just, it's a different way of thinking. And I understand it's outside of what we usually do.
So it's not, it wasn't prevented, but you're still having to respond and go from place to place. And, when you have people that are calling and you're trying to respond and make sure that your residents understand that you're still here, you're working, you're trying to deal with the issue. And I agree, that is the reason why I was very thankful when we had the elders come, right? Because when the elders came, it was a different, it was a de-escalation tactic, and it was an ability. And even though I know that might've been controversial for some, but I believe that you're right, that the response, when you're looking for a fight and you get a fight, and it sort of, escalates the matter when we want to try to de-escalate. And there are ways in which we can work together to ensure that that happens. But I also think that that's why it was, I was thankful for the elders to come to be a part of it, to really be that, to be that strength in the crowd, and to be able to have that discussion, not just with the police department, but also with, some of the protesters that were, that wanted to escalate some things. And so my point in all of this is that we're in this together to make sure that we are protecting and trying our best to work collectively together to protect the property and the health of individual residents, to make sure that we're protecting the right for people to protest and to do so safely in our community, to make sure that we are doing what's necessary to have our officers' well-being and health. And so it is a delicate balance that we're trying to get right. And there have been times where we've gotten it wrong, and, gotten it severely wrong. And, I was on the call. I know that the council president was on the phone, talking about this and doing things to try to get it right. I think that, you have a chief that is committed, an executive deputy chief that is committed to working collectively to get it right, and to balance all of these different factors that we have going on in our community at one point in time, and to make sure that everyone understands and understands that she's at the table. She is willing to listen. She's willing to have that discussion. She has a executive deputy chief and other officers that are a part of her team that want to do that. I would just say, let's give her an opportunity to show and to prove and to work collectively with you all to bring about the balance that you all are looking for.
Matt, if I could also
thank
add.
you.
Oh, all right.
You all have been very generous with your time. I genuinely appreciate that. I know that we're running into some other kinds of time commitments. So Chief Harriet, if you wanted to wrap it up, that's fine.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to reiterate that it's true. We're here to serve. We're here to help, and we want to engage in partnership. But it's also true we have to be ready for, you know, the worst. We plan and hope for the best. So in this last protest, some of the ones we had over the weekend were really a peaceful march from a intersection over to in front of the Special Operations Division police station. But unexpectedly, they made a decision to shut down 490 and some other things happened. So that really, now we have to be prepared to protect those protesters. We don't want to see anybody get hurt. So I think that we all want to see fairness and justice. And I think we can start with that. And then let's use that as an opportunity to come to the table and start figuring out a way that we can move forward together so everybody feels heard. And I welcome that as much as I also do working in partnership with you to make sure these things happen. So, but I want to thank you so much for your time tonight. And I look forward to future discussions on it.
Thank you all. So we've got much work to do and hopefully more time to do it. So I thank you all for joining us this evening and want to say good night.
Good night.
Good night.